Welcome to Game Data. This week we're taking a look at the Analogue Pocket, a Game Boy that's not a Game Boy but looks like a Game Boy and does Game Boy things. It takes Game Boy cartridges, Game Boy Advance cartridges, Game Gear cartridges. Short of Nintendo re-releasing the Game Boy Advance SP as an unhinged revised model, this is bound to be the most modern commercially available Game Boy clone anyone can buy for the foreseeable future. I've been waiting for this shiny handheld game console for well over a year, and I was super excited when it finally arrived about a month ago, and I could finally play some of my older games without straining my eyes on the tiny screen of the Game Boy Advance SP. And, oh man, it really hasn't let me down yet. But that doesn't mean it's for everybody. There are some definite factors to consider before you let its stylishness empty your wallet. After all, in this age of easy emulation and cheaply available Game Boys, why spend the money on something like this? Well, keep watching, and you just might find out. Okay, let's get started. For anyone unfamiliar with Analogue, they're a fairly niche company whose main focus is designing consoles which replicate the feel and appearance of classic consoles, while utilizing FPGAs to play old cartridges directly. Strictly speaking, emulation is a dirty word to them, because both marketing and the fact that they put so much R&D into enabling you to play original cartridges with near original hardware.
For example, here's a Super NT I bought from them a while back. It uses a very similar connector as the original consoles, only plays SNES games, and only has ports for SNES controllers. Outside of a custom OS, an HDMI port, and some additional flash storage on board, this is essentially a no-compromise Super Nintendo clone that connects directly to my 4K TV without need for adapters or upscalers.
The Pocket applies this concept to the OG Game Boy, albeit with a few more modern twists. Now, from a distance, you'd be forgiven for thinking this was actually a Game Boy. The shape and button layout are very much like that iconic style. However, unlike the Super NT, which attempted to mimic the SNES exactly, the Pocket attempts to improve upon Nintendo's design where possible. Compared to the Game Boy Color, the Pocket feels heftier, more premium to hold, yet still oddly familiar to pick up for the first time, which is an interesting feat considering how much the buttons and ports have actually been shifted.
Unlike the Game Boy Color, the link cable port has been shifted to the bottom of the device next to a new USB-C port used for charging and display out. Where the port used to live is now a micro SD card slot. It's a minor change, but feels like a symbolic admission that folks are more likely to share games digitally than via a cable. Nonetheless, that port still works like any other link cable port out there for multiplayer gaming. Opposite the card slot, we also have some clicky plastic power and volume buttons, which aren't personally my favorite, but they definitely get the job done and feel decent overall. That sentiment carries over to the face and shoulder buttons. I enjoy them, but they're a bit stiff to press and triggers wiggle a little bit when my finger's on them.
The upside here is that they at least are spaced out enough to accommodate my larger hands, something I can't really say about the Game Boy Advance SP. To be honest though, if you're buying this, you're not doing it for buttons and ports. You're taking one look at that gorgeous LCD and screaming in joy for the fact that you can finally plug in that copy of Emerald version you got about 18 years ago and continue where you last left off on it. That's really the key experience here. Any smartphone currently on the market can emulate Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games fairly well. Multiple phones have even been released with physical buttons to get the experience just a tad bit closer to the feel of the original hardware without relying on awkward touchscreen controls or bulky controller clips. but it's not quite the same.
Like, take the Xperia Play as an example. Its PSP-like buttons offer a pretty nifty experience for playing random GBA games, but actually playing a game like Drill Dozer just doesn't feel the same as on something like the Pocket. Even with the Easy Flash Omega Drive I use to fill pricier gaps in my collection, playing Drill Dozer feels 10 times better with a satisfying rumble and slightly more responsive controls.
Not to mention, if you're anything like me, there's something extra satisfying about grabbing a physical game cartridge, slotting it in, and it just working.
Out of the box, the Pocket takes Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance cartridges. With an adapter, it'll also play Game Gear as well as patched or newer Game Boy games created via GB Studio, like Flutter or Petrus. Plus, Nanoloop comes pre-installed to mess around with music tracks, which I've spent way too much time messing around with personally. In many ways, Analogue's positioning the Pocket to be the only retro handheld you'll ever need for physical game cartridges.
The extra benefit to playing on the Pocket compared to a more basic console is the software, to an extent at least. When playing a game, the Pocket allows for various tweaks to the game's appearance, like mimicking how the game would have appeared on its original console, or changing the background color for original Game Boy games. It's a small touch, but does wonders for not cornering players into only playing with the extra sharp visuals provided by the LCD. Plus, save states. There's only one slot right now, and that's while the device is powered on, but it's a nice to have for cartridges whose batteries are long dead. Analogue keeps saying that they're going to have future updates for additional save states, Super Game Boy borders, extra controller support, and an abundance of other options associated with what they've dubbed Analogue OS. Right now, that hasn't released though, and while fun to look forward to, I wouldn't buy the Pocket just for those features alone. Another use folks may have for the Pocket is using all those random accessories that launch for the pre-DS consoles. Unfortunately, as compatible as it is with many systems, some accessories work better than others. For example, my e-reader doesn't fit into the cartridge space and my GameCube link cable can't quite connect to the port due to the clips it has. Meanwhile, bulkier games like Drill Dozer, Pokemon Pinball, or the Game Boy camera will likely be fine. Essentially, if the accessory can physically slot in, it'll likely work. The same can't necessarily be said about flash cards. My Omega Drive Definitive Edition worked right out of the box with no additional setup needed. Yet, plenty of posts to the Analogue Pocket subreddit have called out that other cards have been more hit or miss.
Like I said before, this is mainly a console for folks with large physical games collections, but you might want to do your research beforehand if you're interested and want to dabble in flashcards. When you do finally play though, know that it's a pretty comfortable experience to play for long periods of time. There was a breaking in period for me as I tried to claw grip my way past the first badge in Pokemon Leaf Green, but when I finally relaxed, it felt just right. I do prefer the OG horizontal design of the Game Boy Advance a bit more, to be honest, since it gives just a little bit more space for the shoulder buttons and my hands. For games relying heavily on shoulder buttons, there's also not a ton of space here to rest my fingers due to the location of the cartridge slot. On the upside though, the vertical design at least makes sure that the cartridges aren't too exposed when playing. So the trade-off isn't entirely terrible. Still, with the current setup, I would have also liked the card slot to be just a tad bit deeper so that my GBA cartridges didn't stick out as much.
But I think that's pretty nitpicky at this point. Honestly, I think the most of the trade-offs here are smartly done without sacrificing comfort on something that can switch between multiple different consoles. Unfortunately, even if all of what I've said so far sounds fantastic to you, there's some huge downsides which might temper your enthusiasm. The first is the price. Currently, Analogue's charging around $220 USD for one of these handhelds. For most people, I'd say it's not worth the price. Not because the console doesn't provide that much value, but because $200+ is a large chunk of money for anyone who only wants to play a few Game Boy games. Game Boy Advance SPs are still less than half the Pocket's price at the time of this video, especially if you find one at a second-hand shop like Goodwill. The current price point only really makes sense for folks with already large physical collections who want the best possible handheld to play their games. For us, it's actually not a terrible deal. For a comparable form factor, I'd look at the GBA SP unhinged kits. Granted, you already had a GBA SP, building something similar to the Pocket, minus the software-related bells and whistles, can cost up to $200 anyway. So Analogue's price feels fairly reasonable in that context. But if you weren't in the target audience in the first place, you might feel differently. Especially for the second huge downside, availability. Kind of like with the Steam Deck right now, you can't just go to Analogue's website, purchase a Pocket, and expect it on your doorstep within a week. At best, they'll put you on a waitlist for a round of shipments sometime in 2023. For most of Analogue's products, you're either online when a drop happens or you're not getting one for a very long time. During the last drop, I had to order mine within 2 minutes of it going live to get the console when I did. They sell very quickly. Also, like the Steam Deck, your only way to not wait around forever would be to go to eBay and purchase one for an extremely high markup price from a scalper. I do not recommend supporting scalpers in any regard, since they're partially to blame for many folks not being able to get one of these consoles in the first place. However, it may be your only option if the Pocket is exactly what you want and you don't feel like waiting a full year for another chance at it. The same goes for the myriad of adapters and accessories they sell alongside the Pocket. 3 out of 4 of the cartridge adapters are still coming soon, over a year after launch, and their proprietary dock used to output the Pocket to a monitor is also severely backlogged. 10 minutes after ordering my Pocket initially, I ordered a dock and a Game Gear adapter, and I have an estimated shipment date of December of this year. So expect to wait an even longer time if you want both the dock and the Pocket to come in the same package. Now, there's a lot to love about Analogue's products, but they're almost impossible to get without deep pockets and a huge amount of patience. And that's a real shame given how well the Pocket manages to take the original Game Boy concepts and place them into a package I actually want to take with me when traveling. If you're interested in something like the Pocket but don't feel like waiting or supporting scalpers, I highly recommend doing some searching for Game Boy Advance modifications, many of which can actually be done with nothing but a screwdriver kit. I'll leave a link down in the description to the unhinged GBA SP I mentioned, but there are a ton of cheaper modifications out there that can also go a long way to making your experience feel just a bit more premium without getting something new and fancy like the Pocket. With any luck, Analogue will get a larger product supply eventually, and all of this talk about lack of availability will be completely outdated. However, until then, I'd like to hear from y'all. What do y'all think about the Analogue Pocket? Is it something you'd be interested in? Or is it a bit much for you? Let me know down in the comments. Also, if you liked this video, go ahead and click that like button to let us know that we did a good job. If you'd like to see more video game tech videos in the future, you should also definitely get subscribed to this channel. I have more than a few cool gadgets I'm testing right now that I'm sure y'all will geek out over as much as I have. But that's it for now. Until next time, catch you later.